The Red and the Assiniboine Rivers join together here in Winnipeg at the Forks. It's a gathering place for both people and water. The waters of these two rivers make their way northward into Lake Winnipeg, which is utilized as a reservoir by the provincial Crown Corporation, Manitoba Hydro. The flow eventually powering hydroelectric generation on the Nelson River on its way out to Hudson Bay. Robert Spence of Tatasquiac Cree Nation knows about that.
I want to say so much to you guys so that the rest of southern Manitoba and the rest of the world can get how we feel.
But more with him later. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau made an announcement here at the Forks earlier this year.
This province, as was pointed out, is home to over 100,000 lakes and rivers, with water flowing in from the Rockies and the States all the way out to Hudson Bay. So it only makes sense that it's here in Winnipeg that we're setting up the new Canada Water Agency.
The changes that are made for us to live by, we don't decide for ourselves. They're dictated to us. We can't separate us from the environment. We're part of it.
And we recognize the partnership of Indigenous communities and their reminder that water is life.
Not only is Canada getting a new federal water agency, but an updated Canada Water Act, too. According to the PMO's announcement, one of the first priorities of the agency will be to begin the work of modernizing the Canada Water Act to reflect the importance of Indigenous rights.
We remain focused on lifting all remaining long-term drinking water advisories, like we've done in communities like Shoal Lake.
Shoal Lake 40 is emblematic of the kinds of drinking water challenges First Nations communities have faced. And so it would seem the government aims to bring Indigenous voices to the water table, so to speak.
I can't say I have a lot of confidence right now. What I can say is that I'm continuing to be optimistic. It remains to be seen based on who the leaders of this act will eventually be.
Jerry Daniels is Grand Chief of the Southern Chiefs Organization in Manitoba. He told us he welcomes the idea of Indigenous voices at the table, if that's what the new Canada Water Act brings.
Well, I think they need to transfer jurisdiction and they need to fund organizations like ourselves to establish our own water agencies, our own First Nations water agencies. They can be sort of an umbrella support network that has and collects and creates partnerships that set up best practices.
When we met with Grand Chief Daniels, he was about to head to a meeting in Toronto of the Forum for Leadership on Water, a group very interested in influencing federal policy on freshwater protection. Daniels participated in their discussions on what the new Canada Water Act and Canada Water Agency ought to look like. And joining those discussions as well was Indigenous water rights expert Aimee Kraft.
My name is Aimee Kraft. I'm an associate professor at the University of Ottawa. I hold a research chair in Nibbe-Minawaki in Okanagan, which is Indigenous governance in relationship with land and water. I co-lead major research grant called Decolonizing Water. I'm an Anishinaabe Métis person. I'm from this territory.
We met Kraft just downstream from the Pine Falls Generating Station, southeast of Lake Winnipeg, a hydroelectric facility near Seguin First Nation.
This is a really important river. This is the Winnipeg River, and this is the water that comes up from the United States through the Rainy and Namakan and through Lake of the Woods, and then it flows down the Winnipeg River and into the lake. So this is water that ultimately is going to end up in the Hudson's Bay. So this is a very unique place in terms of the water that's coming through here, coming into and meeting water that comes from the Rocky Mountains. And also it's very unique in that there are 7 hydroelectric dams, historic dams, on the Winnipeg River. So this is a space of travel. It was the fur trade route as well. So the original exploration expeditions were coming through this territory and into Western Canada through this river. Now there are dams on the river, so travel has been impeded, but Indigenous people used this as a highway for millennia prior to the creation of the dams post-colonization. There are actually stories of some of the elders that talk about throwing rock across the river here that you can't do anymore. The river has widened and the ice has become unstable in the winter.
Here, as in other locations where hydro projects have altered natural flows, shorelines have a tendency to wash away.
And they call it riprap. And the idea is to mitigate the shoreline erosion. Prior to this rock being put here, this would have been a pretty sandy shore. Maybe you would have pulled a boat up here. Maybe we could have come here by boat, but we can't now because of the rock.
Yeah, they've kind of limited, if not eliminated, human interaction with the water here. To really understand why water is so important in Indigenous culture and life, it's useful to see what happens when the relationship with it is destroyed. And so A.May Craft recommended we visit Robert Spence in Titasqueaq Cree Nation, also known as Split Lake.
Robert said something to me once when I met him, and he said it on a few different occasions. He said, "I grew up in the shadow of a dam, and I'll die in the shadow of another."
There are many stories of what can happen to Indigenous communities and their water and land when hydro projects come. And one of those stories is happening right now at Split Lake, Manitoba, the home of Titasqueaq Cree Nation and Robert Spence. To get into Titasqueaq, first we have to go through the community's checkpoint, set up to stop drugs and alcohol from coming in. An indication of a problem Robert Spence and others in Split Lake connect to hydro development.
My name is Robert Spence. I'm from Titasqueaq. I was a former counselor for the community at one time for 6 years, and before that I was a commercial fisherman, hunter, trapper, artist, father, and a grandfather. This is a medallion that a woman from the city made me. It's representative of the work that I do for the water, the sturgeon, and my late son, who I honor the work to today. He took his life in July 1, 2021. I've been advocating for going on probably 30 years now, 20, 30 years on the Churchill River. And the Churchill River sturgeon are in danger of going extinct because there's only one remnant population left on the whole Churchill River from Missy Falls control structure to the coast of the Hudson's Bay. That's a 450-kilometer stretch of water that used to be a healthy, teeming river full of life. It is now just a chain of dry lakes connected by a stream.
What Spence is talking about is how Manitoba Hydro has diverted most of the water from the Churchill River into the Nelson River to power a series of hydroelectric dams along the Nelson. So the depleted flow of the Churchill River still allowed to make its way to Hudson Bay has affected fish negatively. And Split Lake, which the Nelson River flows through, is between 2 hydroelectric dams along the Nelson, Kelsey and Kiosk, impacting Split Lake's fish and subsequently Titasqueaq's culture and quality of life.
The governments and corporations expect us to live live our lives as best we can in a natural way, in an unnatural world that they've manipulated and destroyed, all for the creature comforts of the South, all so that we can turn on buttons and flip switches.
As Spence has seen firsthand, hydro's manipulations of Split Lake's water levels and flows brings erosion sediment caused by the Churchill River diversion.
The South thinks that we live in clean, green, pristine environments because that's the picture that Manitoba Hydro would like to portray to the people in the South buying the power. They don't see the devastations to the lands, the water, the environment, the aquatics, the mud, the devastation. They see a picture painted on the side of the building along Portage Avenue in Winnipeg.
And some of the effects of all this, says Spence, are suicide and a community drug problem.
We bought this bench after our son took his life, after we lost him. And we put it back here because this is where we used to enjoy spending a lot of time together.
Spence sees the destruction of his world by Manitoba Hydro's ecological alterations as what led to his son's death.
My son used to help me set nets. He used to help me clean the nets out here in the yard. He used to help me out on the lake all the time. That was his happy time, going out with Dad on the water to make a living for my family. He said to his mom, "Mom, I want to do what Dad does. I want to do everything he does. I want to go everywhere he goes." So we spent a lot of time together, not only just on the water, but out in the land too. But I couldn't maintain and keep that way of life because I wasn't able to fish. I figured I'm gonna try and fight those changes that have happened. I went to the boardrooms of the provincial government, boardrooms of Manitoba Hydro, and told them what they were doing. Meanwhile, I left my son behind. I forgot about my son. And this one I did 2 days after, I did this 2 days after we lost our son. This one I did a long time ago. It is how I envisioned my life would be when I got older, living my life out on the land with just my 2 dogs in a simple tent. Just to live out a peaceful, humble existence without any fancy technology around. Because all we need is out there, and that's representative of. And this one I did a long time ago when I felt as though one of these days I was going to leave all the problems of the world behind and fly with the eagles, with the spirit of the eagles. When all the problems of the world, when all the weight of the world would drop off my shoulders and I would be able to fly with the spirit of the eagles back home to the spirit world.
And now, Tatasquiac is so ruined for Spence, he says he'd be willing to leave it behind.
If Canada's ready to supply the infrastructure, the housing, and the creature comforts of what we have here, damn right I'm ready to move. Only the older generations scream and cry for the things that we had before we know we lost and never can get back. If Canada is willing to relocate some of the people from this community who are ready and willing and able to relocate, damn right I'm going to relocate.
The federal government is responding to the situation in Tatasquiac. by building them a new water treatment plant, a move that came after the band won a settlement in court. We met with Titasqueaq Chief Tara-Lee Beardy.
So we'll be starting construction next spring, I believe. So that's something good because we're changing instead of getting our water from the Nelson River, we'll be getting it from Ashan Lake, which is a better lake. It's not on the main stream where all the hydro dams are located.
Getting the drinking water situation fixed is nice, but Beardy would like more influence going forward over what happens.
Yes, I think we should be sitting at the table and discussing what should be in the legislation to protect our lands, our waters. Because, you know, we live here, we see what's happening. We're the ones that are impacted on a daily basis.
With the impacts on Indigenous life from hydroelectric dams, and not just here in Manitoba, of course, but across the country, it's noteworthy that Indigenous people have been left out of previous versions of the Canada Water Act.
What does the current Canada Water Act say about Indigenous water rights?
Nothing. If you look at the original act, it was focused primarily on agriculture and preserving quantities of freshwater resources.
And how might a new Canada Water Act recognize Indigenous water rights?
Well, I think it should start at least in a preambular way, if not in the substance of the text, speaking to concepts of reconciliation, but diving into UNDRIP. And free, prior, and informed consent has become the hallmark of UNDRIP. And that means not only, being passively consulted and then providing consent, but actually being involved in decision making and management of different kinds of water resources and impact on water through the management of other resources as well.
And it also ought to incorporate a new way of thinking, says Kraft.
So it's a shift of paradigm to let's control water, which is a very Western idea of thinking, to an Indigenous thought or methodology of considering water as living, as having its own agency.
Kraft says a declaration put out by the Treaty 3 Grand Council is a good place to look for inspiration. The Nibi Declaration defines how Anishinaabe people understand water and their relation to it. Nibi, water, is alive and has spirit, the declaration begins. It is the lifeblood of our mother, Aki, and connects everything. It can give, sustain, and take life. But in whatever manner the new Canada Water Act ends up incorporating Indigenous rights and reflecting Indigenous thought on respecting water, it's not clear exactly how it will work within the federal-provincial framework of Canada.
Well, it is federal legislation, so that's one issue. It's not going to be provincial legislation, although there may be provincial acts that follow a federal piece of legislation. And so with, like in Manitoba and the Western provinces, the transfer of the authority over natural resources, the province does have a large part to play in the management and governance of water if you look at it as a resource. So there will have to be some coordination agreements, possibly coordinating legislation within the provinces as well.
We asked Manitoba Hydro what they thought the implications of a new Canada Water Act might be for how they operate. They told us, from our review, there are currently no proposed amendments in the new Canada Water Act that have implications for Manitoba Hydro or that we can comment on. It isn't clear how the new act and agency will affect any particular water-related situation Indigenous communities are facing. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's Parliamentary Secretary, MP Terry Duguid, spoke with us about what the government has planned. Details are still somewhat sketchy, but Duguid told us a little about how the new agency and act are expected to work.
It is going to be a funding agency, and so the federal government is going to be supporting partnerships with First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Well, we'll be launching the agency formally next spring. But meanwhile, we've been talking to Indigenous organizations, including the Assembly of First Nations. and Manitoba Métis Federation, other Indigenous organizations.
To fund the new agency's work, the government has committed $750 million to be spent over the next decade. Duguid notes that the new water agency will not be regulatory in nature.
So just to make clear, the agency it's designed to bring everybody together to work on solutions.
The new act will be written by the Justice Department. And if they're looking for First Nations people to consult with, two guys who tell them straight how it is are Robert Spence and his cousin Jonathan Kitchikizik. They're taking me out on Split Lake to show me some things.
And so you see all those trees that they're piling up all along the shore, eh?
Yeah.
Those will be burnt later on in the season. Like around October, they'll come back and burn all those piles so that they don't go back in the water when the water rises again. What you see here now used to be treed. There was only a small beach here. Over the past few decades, from all the manipulations of the system from Manitoba Hydro, the tree line used to extend further out this way, like we would have been standing in bush a couple decades ago. Now what they're doing is they're piling up the debris that drifted up along the banks of the island from when the waters were excessively high during flood season. When hydro releases all the water through Kelsey down into the lower Nelson here at Split Lake. When they do that, the water rises, kills off the trees die off. As they die off, they drift off into the water.
Spence shows us the extra sediment coming into Split Lake because of the Churchill River Diversion, or CRD.
And you look over here, when you look out at the water over here, the water is all muddy on that side. And it's from all the clays that accumulate coming down the CRD out onto Split Lake. That's what's killed Split Lake. That's why there's no more vegetation on Split Lake. You're able to turn that camera off like that and live on with the rest of your life however you please in comfort in the south. We can't switch that off over here. It's not 9 to 5, 8 to 5. It's not as simple as that. We have to live with all of this 24/7, 365.